Good morning, everyone, or good whatever time you're watching or listening to us from. Welcome to the R Squared Show, the real and the raw, with me, Lucy Soni, where we get to unpack real and raw tough conversations. And today with me in studio is none other than Nothemba, Kula.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for honoring the invite.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I have been looking forward to this day. Yeah, so I'm really happy that you're here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So maybe you could get to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm Nothemba Kula, and I am South African, born and raised. And I come from the southeastern part of South Africa, the Eastern Cape, and I am Xhosa. And I won't ask you to say that. But I am Xhosa, and most importantly, I think born again at a very young age, at 16, and so blessed to have had an encounter with Christ at the earlier stages of my life, because the values and the principles that have guided my life have largely been Christian values. And a core part of those values has been education. And I know most people, think that the Bible only speaks to the spiritual aspect of a person. But when the Bible says we ought to love the Lord with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole soul, that basically tells you that as far as God is concerned, He expects us to express our love for Him with everything that we have, including the mind. So I'm very big on education. I'm a public health specialist, so I specialized in public health in developing countries, and I've worked, both within South Africa and outside of the country to work with governments and private companies to help them to improve the state of healthcare. And so it's been a real joy and a pleasure, being on a journey with Christ that is very complete, in the sense that it's not just about my ministry within church, but it covers every single area of my life.
Yeah. Incredible. When I met you for the first time last year, October 2022, during Epic Women.
Oh, wow.
I was there, Epic
wow.
Women with
That's
Joyce,
lovely.
and then I met you for the second time at K Crew Bible Study.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I remember thinking I'd really want to have a conversation with you, because you strike to me as a powerful woman who, as you're saying, you're all-rounded. You don't just show God in your area of ministry, but in everything you do. From your book, which I know for sure you mentioned about it, to you being a public health specialist. It's something that really makes me happy, because I want to be such a woman. I just don't want to be a boss babe doing very well academically, but I'm not succeeding in all these other areas. So, which brings us to the topic of the day. Today we'll be talking about the marketplace plus ministry. So, how to be a Christian witness in the marketplace, how to be an all-rounded Christian, making sure that you're not just serving, but you're also excelling in all these other areas. I remember I was watching one of your videos on YouTube, and you said that it really helps to not just be born again, but even when you step in the boardroom, you're making powerful PowerPoints, you're making great presentations, And so I really want us to talk about that today. How do I get to be a Christian witness in the marketplace, and how has that looked like for you in your life?
Absolutely. As I was saying, the scriptures are very comprehensive. Love the Lord your God with your mind, with your soul, with your body, with your all. In other words, every single aspect of your life has got to demonstrate the love of Christ. And I think it begins with taking yourself seriously, Lucy. You have to view yourself as the kind of person who is an instrument and a vessel in the hands of God. And so if you go to any environment, you don't just go because you were invited. I'm not on this show simply because we had a conversation. I'm an instrument in the hand of God. There's someone watching, there's someone listening that God is trying to reach out to. And so I take myself as a vessel quite seriously. And when you take yourself seriously, the first thing that will help you to become a Christian witness in the marketplace is that you've got to invest in yourself. When the Bible talks about the parable of the talents and how the expectation of the master was that if I've given you one, I can't come back and find one,
Yeah.
okay? Because God is an investor. If He deposits a gift into your life, His expectation is that when He comes back, He must find more than what He has given you.
That's true.
Which means that every single thing that is deposited in us, we ought to treat it as an investment. So personally, what that looks like for me is that I am just unashamed, unapologetic when it comes to investing in myself. If there is a skill that I can build into myself and into my life, I don't hesitate. I go all the way in. And that's why, academically speaking, I started out, as a research scientist, and I worked my way to do, courses that were really not very popular or mainstream. I did like a master's degree, as an example, in bioinformatics. And bioinformatics is computational biology. Whenever I say I worked as a bioinformatician, people say, as a bio, what?
Yeah.
What do bioinformaticians do?
Yeah.
And it was very deliberate. It was a way of investing into myself so that I can go into spaces that ordinarily, black young women at the time, did not go into. And I did 3 master's degrees and many other courses. Yeah.
Wow.
3 master's degrees, and I'm actually doing a PhD as we speak.
Interesting.
And I just built into my life in every way possible, because I strongly believe that the quality of what you do depends on the quality of who you are. Okay? It depends on the quality of who you are.
Yeah.
All of us as women, we dabble a little bit in the kitchen. The texture of a meal, the presentation of a meal, it depends on how good quality the ingredients you have used are. If you use good quality ingredients, you will never go wrong.
Wow.
And so I believe that. So the first thing is that you must be the kind of individual who says, what are the areas of my life in which I need to invest? What are the areas of my life that God is going to use that I know that I need to build into? And it's got to be a comprehensive overhaul. You cannot invest into yourself spiritually, but as you were saying, when you go back to the boardroom at work on Monday, people can't believe, is this the same at church? But out here, we can't really make ends meet in terms of what we can't understand what you're saying. You're not making any sense. So you really do have to invest into your life. I dare say, even physically, in terms of your appearance. Every single aspect of you, because I'm looking at you and all this red and all this beauty, and this is what we're talking about. You've got to invest in yourself. There's a statement that says you have to make a statement without saying a word. Even before you speak, people have to see, this one has taken time to invest in herself. And that in itself is a ministry. There are people who just be interested in you, even before you said anything, because they can see that you've really taken the time to invest, even in terms of how you look. So that is key. It's number 1, is investing into yourself as a vessel. The second thing, if you're going to make an impact in the marketplace, is that you have got to be clear about your assignment. Right? Be very clear about your assignment. There is a saying that says, if all you have is a hammer, then you're going to treat everything like a nail, because you've only got one instrument, and therefore your assignment is going to be limited to just hammering everything, because all you've got is one instrument, that is a hammer. And what that means for us personally is that if you understand your assignment, then you make sure that everything in your life supports your assignment. So if God calls me into a particular company, and I understand that my environment is to build into the lives of people in this environment, automatically that excludes me from certain relationships. If it doesn't help me to fulfill my assignment, I can't be part of it.
I love that.
If those people are not going to support me to implement the assignment, I'm not interested in you. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste my effort on things that are not aligned to my assignment. I know that in this company, I am here to encourage, I'm here to motivate, I'm here to build into the skills of the individuals that are here. I know why I'm here, and I know why I am not here. And I think understanding your assignment is what keeps you focused.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's not every invitation that you say yes to. That invitation has got to be aligned to your assignment.
That's true.
If it has nothing to do with what God has brought me here to do, then I have no interest in it.
Yeah.
So I think when you understand your assignment in that company, in that space, then you are able to be focused. So I think, those are just some of the things that have been helpful to me.
I love that.
Yeah.
You've just reminded me about what you preached about at K Crew when you came. And it was about if we are really going to need God to, open the gates for us and, commanding wealth and all that, we're going to really have to choose our audience and choose. And that's what I'm hearing from what you're saying.
Absolutely.
There are things you just can't allow yourself to be in. Who are you interacting with? What is your diet looking like? Are you consuming every content, And I love that because even in my university life, I've seen people aspire to really be big people in the future. But if you look at the kind of life they're living right now, what are you doing to make sure that you're going to get there?
Absolutely.
What are some of the characters and the values you're building to live like the person you want to become? I love that. Yeah.
That is very key, and I think that is partly why people ask this question around how do you balance? I think if you understand your assignment, you'll be very balanced. A lack of balance comes out of thinking that in order to be impactful, you have to be everywhere and you have to do everything. And that's not the way that it works. You become impactful when you focus on the things that are aligned to your assignment. You don't have to go to every party. You don't have to go to every invitation. You simply have to focus on those things that are aligned to what you have been called to do. And I think beyond that, when the Bible says that we are the light of the world, we are the salt of the earth. The third aspect, I think, of being impactful and influential, especially in the marketplace, is understanding the value that you add. So adding value is about saying, if I go to any environment, I cannot live it the way that it was before I came. I have to ask myself the question, what value have I added? There's a portion of scripture I love when God is leading the Israelites out of Egypt, and they get to Egypt. The Pharaoh is very receptive and he gives them favor. But when the Pharaoh speaks to Joseph, he says, what can your people do? I like them, they're a great bunch, they're your family, but I've got a country to run. I've got an economy here to manage. I've got a population that I need to serve. So whilst I like you as a person, you are not going to last in any environment if you are not adding value. If we cannot see how is our company different because you came on board. How is our project moving forward because you came on board? So at the end of the day, it's not just about being beautiful. It's not just about, being likable. It's about when you do come to that environment within that marketplace, what value are you adding? If we were having a deficit as a company or organization, are we now making profits as a result of you being part of that company? So I think it's absolutely critical. You don't just invest into yourself or just build into yourself just for the sake of it. It is so that you can add value to every environment that you are part of.
I love that. So if you can allow me to build on that, with the many great leadership roles that you've had, how has that helped you to set yourself up for the competitive market? And of course, with mind that you cannot accept every opportunity that comes your way. So how has that helped you to, first of all, understanding your assignment and now setting yourself up for the competitive market?
I think, like I said about investing into yourself, the other part of investing into yourself relates to being able to identify what gaps exist and what you need to do today so that in the future you are able to fill a gap that you see is about to happen. And I think that happens in many industries. So if you look at digitization as an example, you look at all of us, we know the story of Kodak as a company who could not look into the future, as it were, and see that actually the future is digital.
Yeah.
And so as a company, we've got to be going into research and development. We must go into R&D right now, so that we can set ourselves up for the digital future that we can see is coming.
Yeah.
And it works the same way at an individual level. We knew, like, I'm in healthcare, I've done public health, and at the time, you know, the infectious diseases were coming up. We had HIV, we had TB, there were a lot of tropical diseases, particularly in the African continent. And one could foresee that this is going to be a big problem in the future. So you have to ask yourself, what problem am I positioning myself to solve? We cannot go into careers and into the marketplace because you like Wahiga and he's done a great job of being at media, and the only reason you are in this field is because you want to be like him. That's not the way that it works.
That's true.
You have to understand, what problem are you specifically trying to solve, and you build into yourself, because you can see that there is a problem in this industry that's going to require people to innovate, people to think differently, people to implement different strategies, and then you build yourself that way. So I think I've always taken that approach of looking at my context, understanding what challenges exist in that sphere, and then saying, how do I need to build into myself such that I am one of the people that, if governments are thinking about making improvements in a particular area, they'll definitely be like, we want Nothemba to be a part of this. So I think that's one. You've got to have foresight. You've got to be able to look ahead and see what is going to be needed, and then build into yourself so that you're able to meet the demand. That's number one. The second, I think, is that, Lucy, you've got to be very flexible and adaptable. So if you look at particularly people who have worked within government, I don't know how it is in Kenya, but in South Africa, most people who have been in the public sector tend to work in those spaces for like 40 years. 50 years. Oh, I started years young. I was 20 when I started. Now, you know, they're retiring. They've been in that space for 40 years. Nothing has changed. Same environment, same department, same everything. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think if you're going to grow in new ways, if you're going to be part of new spaces, you're gonna need to be very adaptable and very flexible. You were mentioning that with your own career growth, that you could actually see that, look, I know that I had intended to do this, but actually I can be very flexible. I can change and I can adapt to whatever is happening within the market. And that was pretty much my story. I started off research scientist, working for the South African Medical Research Council. I loved the research sciences, but I could see that our government was struggling more with implementation. And I saw that there was going to be a need for people who are going to help government to translate health policy into actual programs that would be delivered. And so I went into government, and when I saw the opportunity to be part of an implementation organization, I definitely took the gap. And I think there's an element of it where you have to be willing to take risks.
That's true.
Okay, you might not have originally planned to do that when you get into that environment, but as you see that there are opportunities becoming available, you've got to be adaptable. You've got to be willing to take risks. And I mean, I went on to work for, you know, really, really great and reputable international development organizations, including the World Bank, the UK Department for International Development. I've done some work for SADC in Gaborone in Botswana, and really lovely organizations that do meaningful and impactful work. And that's because of that adaptability and being able to take risks and not saying, no, I'm just a researcher and I will stick with research, but very flexible. So I think that's something that is also very useful.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So as we are adapting and being in the marketplace is ever evolving. As you're saying, the world has become digital and all that. But what's the thin line between making sure that we are adaptive and flexible in the different sectors we're in, but also remain focused? I love saying the how can change. You know, if you want to travel, you can decide, let me take an Uber today or let me take a public transport. So the how can change, but the why am I doing this? So even as we're in the marketplace and we are adaptive, we are flexible and all that, What's the thin line between, I know this is what we're going to do, but even as things are evolving, this is what God has called us to do. So how do we stay focused despite being in that atmosphere?
I think my experience is that, as you are saying, you've always got to keep the why at the center. So despite the different organizations and the sectors where I adapted, for an example, I've done public health in mining as an example. I never had any training or background in mining, but public health stayed as the constant. So public health is the consistent feature, is the consistent passion, but where I implement public health has changed. It's been in different sectors, it's been in different countries, it's been with different organizations. So whilst you might shift and you might move and you might adapt, but I think the core of the heart and the passion of what it is that you believe your assignment is, I think it goes back to that assignment. My assignment is to ensure, at least from a marketplace perspective, that African populations are able to access good quality healthcare. That's my assignment. That one is not going to shift, it's not going to change, because I believe that health is wealth. You are not able to contribute meaningfully into any environment if you are not healthy, if you cannot access good quality services when you need them at affordable prices. So how are you going to go into politics or go into fashion or go into media if you are lying at a hospital somewhere and there's no medication, there's no doctor? First of all, we've got to make sure that as an individual you are healthy and you are well. That is my assignment. And I work with governments, I work with private sector companies to ensure that that becomes a reality. So that is the one thing that is not going to change. However, the flexibility and the adaptability is always around the mechanics. It might be in a different sector, it might be in a different field or a different country, but the core of the passion remains the same.
Beautiful, I love that. So moving on to the next point. Growing up, I've had people being told your gift will make room for you. And now that brings me to the question of the difference between prophetic calling and professional competency. I'm very good at this professionally, but again, does that tap into what I have been called to do? So maybe we can touch a little about that, prophetic calling and professional competency.
I think that in the analogy I was using about loving the Lord your God with your heart, with your mind, with your body, your soul, your all, that our faith demands that its expression must be visible in every single aspect. So just because there's a prophetic calling upon your life does not automatically translate into professional competence. So you can have someone who is incredibly gifted and anointed from a prophetic perspective, but in terms of you being competent professionally, you are going to have to do a little bit more. I think it takes more, it requires more. It's the same thing like, if I'm good at what I do professionally as a public health specialist, it does not translate to me being a good wife. It does not translate to me being a good mother. The requirements for being a good mother and a good wife are very different from what it's going to require for me to be a good professional in my workplace. And that's, I think, why you find many successful men and women who are successful externally, but they are complete failures in the private space within their lives. They don't know how to manage relationships. They don't know how to manage a marriage or how to raise children, because we make the assumption that because I'm competent, I've got the skill set within the professional space, that it should necessarily translate into me being able to do these things in other spheres. Life doesn't work like that. As a matter of fact, my experience, and I've been married for 20 years, and my experience is that you really have to be committed to be a lifelong student. It requires humility. It requires you being able to say, even though professionally I might be competent, this home is a completely different ball game. When I come here, I have to be a child. I don't move from my office and I come home as the CEO. I come home as Imani and Ivela's mother. I come home as Dr. Kula's wife. And for him, I've got to be able to allow God to break me down, to humble me, and to say to me, this is what you're going to need to do this job of being a wife well, of being a mother well. You don't just take from one aspect to another. That's number one. The second is, I believe very strongly in boundaries. So for an example, I think sometimes we make the mistake when people have got a strong prophetic calling and you relate to these individuals as people who are your mentors. Maybe they speak over your life, they prophesy over your life. And because that relationship works, we tend to want to load a whole lot of other things on that relationship. So we say, now that the prophetic relationship is working, the mentorship relationship is working, maybe we can also go into business together. Maybe now we can start, doing things outside of the church space together. And my experience is that often those things become absolute disasters because a mentorship relationship is a mentorship relationship. I mean, I think there are maybe isolated cases where you might be able to do other things, but I think boundaries say you've got to be content with the relationship that God has given you with an individual, without necessarily trying to now extract other things out of it. Now you want your pastor to be your business partner. Now you want your mentor now to borrow you money. Now you want to just, you are just confusing the relationship. If it's a prophetic calling and you understand the assignment of that person in your life, my experience is appreciate God for that and be content with that. Because the moment you try and do so many other things and load them into one relationship, often it really gets messed up and you are even likely to lose the original relationship. There are people who started well, we were just friends. The moment now we started trying to go into business together, it doesn't work. Because I'm just your friend, I'm not your business partner. Yes, there might be those that work, isolated cases as I say, but I think for me there's really safety in being wise enough to understand what is your assignment in my life and be content with that assignment.
I love that. Beautiful. Okay. So there's someone who's watching and maybe they're thinking, I love everything you're talking about and I have seen myself, I have a God idea or I have God ideas because maybe there are many. But they're thinking, how do I then remain yielded to God's plan for my life? Like I have all these things happening and I once heard you say that a convicted calling, I think when delayed makes you impatient, something like that, So maybe there's someone who's watching and they're like, I feel like God is delaying. I know He's told me to do this, but I don't have a clear picture of what to do. So how do I make sure that I remain yielded to His plan?
I think for me, Lucy, what has been very helpful is to understand that everything that I do can only succeed if I remain, as the scriptures say in John chapter 15, if you remain in me and I in you. That whole analogy of God being the vine and Him being the source. And understanding that if you labor and the Lord is not part of your labor, you are going to labor in vain.
That's true.
So my first commitment is to Christ and to Him alone. My first commitment is to my relationship with Him and ensuring that I remain planted in Him. I was actually telling someone the other day that even when I was, getting engaged to my husband and we were thinking about marriage, one of the things that I told him straight on, looking at him in the face, is that for me, the question that I ask before I get into anything is, what is this going to do to my relationship with God? That is the first relationship that I jealously guard. Because the things that people like about us, these are things that God has built into us. And if we do not remain attached to those souls. Even the things that people like, they're going to be lost. And people will now be in a relationship with you and be like, but you know, when we met, you used to be, you know, a little bit more than this. What happened to you? So people will lose interest, whether it is in a business venture, whether it is in a relationship, because what makes it succeed is the favor of God.
That's true.
It's not so much how skilled, how talented, how connected you are. Because I know a lot of people who are very connected. They cannot make anything work. I know a lot of people who studied, they never got any job. So even the things that we are talking about, they don't just work in and of themselves. The thing that really makes them work is the favor of God upon your life. So the most important thing is to guard the favor of God upon your life. Otherwise, you're going to labor in vain. So for me, it really doesn't help to be impatient and to try and get things done as quickly as possible, because that's not where your success lies. Your success lies in obedience. Your success lies in staying connected to the vine, connected to the source. And when you know that that relationship is intact and is where it should be, you are in a very good place to launch off. And I think that the second thing is that, you know, God works in seasons. So it doesn't help for me to try and reap peaches when it is not the season for peaches. So I have got to be in step with God's season for my life. And the way that works, practically speaking, is that there are times when I know that in this season of my life, God is calling me to spend more time with my children because they are now getting into high school. They are now starting to make decisions about what relationships they go to, what careers they go to. And so I am committed to this particular season. I cannot be impatient and try and do other things outside of this season, because in any event, even if you plant peach seeds, they're not going to grow in that season. It's not just about being busy. It's not just about sowing. It's about understanding what season it is to sow what. Because the scriptures say in the book of Psalms that, you know, whatsoever does prospers. It brings forth fruit in season. And this is like, it has to align with what God is doing in your life in that particular time. And I have found, Lucy, that when you are committed to God's season for your life, He's able to compensate you. So you might be able to, you know, to say, I can't really do that much from a marketplace perspective right now. I cannot stretch myself the way that I used to because I've got young children or I've got teenage children. God will compensate you. A delay in one area because you are focusing on what God is doing in that season, it will never be a denial. God will ultimately reward you for being faithful rather than impatient. So I think for me, you know, in my own personal life, I've seen the favor of God. I've seen how God is able to compensate you when you choose rather to be faithful to what He's doing in a particular season rather than just trying to be busy or trying to be impatient.
That's true. Beautiful. Okay, so let's get to talk about you a little bit. I'm really inspired and I'd love to know what inspired your love for science.
I think that some of these things are inbuilt. You know, you come that way. It's like if you have got a product, you know, Samsung product, it's designed as a microwave. It's got like a propensity to want to heat things up because it is made that way. So I think there's an element of who we are that comes from the way that God made us. So I think there was always like an innate kind of interest or desire to go into the sciences. I mean, even before I was exposed to anyone who was a scientist. I think that's one. So some of these things are inbuilt. But I think also I got into university at a time when there were very few black and in particular female scientists who were going into specific fields. And I think that, you know, part of my calling and assignment is that of being a pathfinder. So I'm very drawn to spaces where there are few people who are willing to venture into that area, because I believe that when you are a pathfinder and a door opener, God is able to use you to show other people what is possible. So I'm very drawn into careers areas, like bioinformatics, and I did like microbiology. I did environmental microbiology as an undergraduate degree, and I did a master's degree in microbiology as well, because I've always had an interest, in those areas that people, how come there are not so many microbiologists?
Yeah.
What is it about this field that seems, to kind of make people feel like they cannot thrive in it, And I think the sciences, we've seen particularly with COVID, we were saying actually, with some colleagues that people who are virologists have always known, but like virology, what is virology?
Yeah.
But now that, COVID came, we can actually see how important these skills are, that actually you can shut down the whole world, and the people who are able to study viruses and come up with vaccines are the people who are really going to help us in this particular era. So I think more than just having an innate interest, I've also always had an appreciation of how important the sciences are in terms of moving the world forward.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so Pushing Back the Darkness.
Yes.
A book I'm yet to read.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about that. What inspired the book?
Pushing Back the Darkness is really an incredible passion of mine, and I think a book that was in the making for a very long time. And I think that the book came from my passion for prayer, because I've also got a calling in intercession, and I've always been part of intercession at church. I was that sister who got to church like an hour before everybody else, and I was like under the chair praying in tongues, and just had a burden for prayer and for intercession, and prayer and intercession really being the one tool with which we push back the darkness. So I believe that before anything manifests in the natural, it has got to be a battle that is won in the spiritual. So pushing back the darkness is a tool and a way of equipping us as saints to win battles spiritually before we can see them manifest in the natural. And it really is my own personal journey. Whilst it is a book that has a strong focus on prayer and on intercession, but it's really very practical. I talk about how I have applied some of those principles in every single area of my life. I talk about, my husband and I often say we were extremely prayerful at that stage before we got married. And, there were people, who would come to me and they would say, God has spoken to me that you are going to be my wife. I'm like, God did not speak nothing to you. Because I have prayed, and you are definitely not what I prayed for.
Yes.
So when you have spent time in prayer, God gives you the ability to discern. He gives you a heart to be able to kind of have this connection with people who are aligned to where He is taking you. And I believe fundamentally in being adequately prepared spiritually. And that's what Pushing Back the Darkness is about. The second aspect of the book, the subtitle says, when you are tired of accepting the unacceptable. And I think that it is in prayer that you are able to gain that militance in your faith, that is able to put your foot down and say, this is not the will of God for my life. I am not going to accept that my life is going to end here. I'm not going to accept that this is the only level at which I'm going to operate. I am going to be bold enough, because you have gone into those spaces of boldness in prayer, even confidence in speaking. If I haven't prayed enough before I get here, and I'm not talking about the 2-minute prayer that we make before we start, I'm talking about living a lifestyle of prayer. It's hours, it's a life of prayer, it's a life in the Word that begins to manifest when you come in public and in the presence of people. It's like what the scriptures say about Peter, that after he denies Jesus, there are the people who are around a fire who are with him. And they say to him, there's something about you that we recognize that is very much similar to what we have seen to Christ. There's a recognition, there's something that people are able to pick up about you that gives them a sense that you have been with Christ. And sometimes it even betrays you. You are trying to hide, you are trying to be inconspicuous. You don't want to be out front, but because of the lifestyle that you live, because of the confidence that the Holy Spirit brings in you, people are just able to pick you out even in environments where you really are not trying to push yourself forward. And I think that's what Pushing Back the Darkness is about. It's an incredible book that has been such an accelerator, I think, because the book was launched here in Kenya last year. It was absolutely incredible, and we've gone on to do a book tour in South Africa in 5 different cities, and it's been amazing, the people that we have connected with and the people who have recognized the darkness that they themselves are trying to push in their lives. And I think one of the very special things about the book is that almost like half of the book is like a series of prayer guides. And these are prayer guides, about how you speak the blood of Christ upon your life and the protection of Christ. So before you go into any room, before you take a journey, there's a whole prayer guide that helps you to pray through scriptures that will talk about protection, that will talk about covering. When you are looking for wisdom before you make particular decisions, there's a prayer guide about praying for the wisdom of God, the knowledge of God, the understanding, the enlightenment of the Spirit. If you are trying to discern, in terms of relationships, whether this is the right relationship or not, there's a prayer guide around that. So it's very comprehensive and actually is a guide that helps us to speak the spiritual principles of the Word of God upon our lives.
I love that. So when it comes to being tired of accepting accepting the unacceptable, there's someone who's looking at us now and they're thinking, my only struggle is fear and self-doubt. So I want us to touch on that a little bit. I'm really tired of accepting the unacceptable, but I can't seem to starve my fear and feed my faith. So how does that look like for you, even when it came to the journey of writing the book? How did your faith inspire your journey to continue?
I think, I'm a firm believer on starting with what you have, which I think is the principle that God was trying to teach Moses when he said to him, just give me the staff in your hand. I know that you've never been a deliverer before. You've never stood before a pharaoh. You've never had to make a speech before a king. And I know that you're afraid. But the journey is going to start with you using what you already have. So if you only have a paragraph, write the paragraph. I mean, I can't tell you the many times when I went into my computer, it was like a blank MS Word document, and I just had like a few sentences. And before I knew it, I was sitting in front of my computer for a whole 2 hours, and I had written an entire chapter. And it was not pre-planned. It's not like I knew that after this I'm going to say this and this is how it's going to flow. And I think that's part of what limits us, is the idea that we want to have the full thing.
That's true.
You want to map the whole thing out before you can begin. Even with the book chapters, I only had one chapter in mind. I just had the subtitle, and I thought, okay, let me just run with the chapter that I have, and let's see where that takes us. So I think you'll be amazed at how the creativity flows immediately you get started. And it's the same with, even if it's not writing, speaking. Before you speak, you are going to be nervous, you're going to have butterflies in your tummy, but the moment you open your mouth, the fear is going to leave. So I think you have to turn on the light. Fear or darkness does not run away by itself. You've got to turn on the light so that when you get started, there is just an energy, there is a flow, there is a wisdom, there is an assistance that the Holy Spirit gives you. I think the second, though, that really helped, especially with the process of writing the book, was to be accountable to someone. So I've got a mentor of mine, Reverend Patrick Kuchio, who was part of Sitam Church at the time, and he was such a mentor, such an inspiration for me. And I remember many times, when I had what they call a writer's block, and I would just sit there for hours and feel no inspiration, I would know that, tomorrow I have a meeting with Rev Kuchio, and if I have not made any progress since the last time that we spoke, it's going to be a problem. So sometimes what really motivates you is a deadline. You've got to have a deadline. And in the process of that, we also brought in a publisher on board.
Oh, nice.
And the publisher now, things are getting a little bit more interesting because now there are deadlines. There's a whole publication process there's now money and investment that has to go into it. And if you have put money and you have put time into something and there are other people involved, it's not just about you. Now you've got to make it work. So I think there are also practical elements. I don't have the luxury to be afraid because I've got a deadline tomorrow. How's Fear going to help me? You know, I need to present to the publisher where we are and whether or not we're going to meet the deadline. So I think get started with what you have, where you are, but also expand what you are doing so that it's not just your small little thing that you are doing in the corner. Involve other people who are going to stretch you and who are going to keep you accountable.
I love that. So maybe as we are winding up, there's someone who's thinking you're such a powerhouse, which of course it's very true you are, and I'm sitting here thinking it's such an honor to be able to draw and learn from you. So how can people connect with you? And if there's anyone who would want to buy the book, how can they find it here?
So I am everywhere, Lucy. I am everywhere on the socials. It's Nothemba Kula on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. I've also got a YouTube page. We actually also run a non-profit organization called Kingdom Development Initiative, which is KDI for short, and our website is kdinitiative.com. So if you go to our website, you'll really find a whole lot of stuff around the work that we do, particularly in South Africa, but also looking to partner with organizations here in Kenya. So if you're interested in collaborating with us in the projects that we do, hit us up on our website, look at the work that we do and whether there are projects that might be aligned to areas of interest, and get in touch with us, and who knows, we could be working together.
That's true.
The book is also available in many bookshops, particularly here in Kenya. I'm actually doing a book signing at Keswick Bookshop at Sarit Center. So if you go to the Keswick Bookshops, you'll find it. Scripture Union Bookshops, Joship Bookshops, and most recently at Naivas. If you go to any of the supermarkets, you should be able to find the book. It's also on Amazon for the people who are all over the digital space. There are also digital copies of the book.
Thank you so much. Any last words, parting shots?
I think it's really been great being part of the show. Thank you for having me. You're doing an absolutely amazing work. I pray that the Lord will continue to open doors for you far and wide, and that the seeds that you have planted are just going to blossom in ways that you might not have anticipated. So God bless you, and thank you to you and the rest of the team.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, that was Nothemba Kula, and my name is Lucy Soni, or Sonia as some of you know me. See you on the next episode.